In a small village nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there was a woman named Amale. She was known far and wide for her beauty, grace, and intelligence. Her skin was the color of rich mahogany, and her eyes sparkled like the night sky. Amale's laughter could light up even the darkest of days, and her kindness knew no bounds. Yet, despite all her virtues, there was one thing that set her apart from the other women in the village. Amale was unmarried. It wasn't that she lacked suitors. On the contrary, many men had come to ask for her hand in marriage. They brought gifts, sang songs of praise, and made promises of love and devotion. But Amale turned them all away. She had a heart full of dreams, dreams that reached far beyond the borders of her village. Amale wanted a love that was true and deep, a love that would inspire her and push her to grow. She wanted a partner who would see her as an equal, not just as a prize to be won. The villagers whispered among themselves, wondering why such a beautiful and talented woman remained unwed. Some said she was too proud. Others claimed she was waiting for a prince from a faraway land. But the truth was, Amale had simply not found the right person. She refused to settle for anything less than the love she knew she deserved. Amale lived with her mother, an elderly woman named Nandi. Nandi had raised Amale on her own after her husband passed away when Amale was just a child. Nandi was wise and loving, and she had taught her daughter everything she knew about life, love, and the importance of staying true to oneself. Nandi understood her daughter's desires and supported her decision to wait for the right person, even if it meant that Amale might never marry. As the years passed, the pressure on Amale to marry grew stronger. The village elders began to worry that Amale's refusal to marry would bring bad luck to the community. They believed that every woman had a duty to marry and bear children, to continue the lineage and keep the village strong. But Amale was not swayed by their concerns. She continued to live her life as she pleased, tending to her garden, helping the sick and elderly, and teaching the village children how to read and write. Amale's best friend Zanele was also unmarried. The two women had been inseparable since childhood, sharing their hopes, dreams, and fears. Zanele was just as independent as Amal, and she too had turned away many suitors. The two friends often discussed the future, wondering if they would ever find the kind of love they dreamed of. One day, while they were sitting by the river that flowed through the village, Zanele turned to Amale with a mischievous grin. "Amale, have you ever thought about what it would be like to marry someone from a different land?" Zanele asked, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. Amal laughed softly. "I have thought about it, but where would I find such a person? Our village is so small and travelers rarely pass through." Zanele shrugged. "You never know, my friend. The world is full of surprises. Perhaps one day someone will come along who will sweep you off your feet and take you on the adventure of a lifetime." Amale smiled, but she didn't let herself get carried away by Zanele's fantasies. She had heard many stories of love and adventure, but she knew that such tales were often just that, stories. Still, a small part of her couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth to what Zanele was saying. What if her true love was out there, waiting for the right moment to find her? As the sun set behind the hills, casting a golden glow over the village, Amale and Zanele made their way back home. The evening air was filled with the sounds of crickets chirping and the distant calls of birds settling in for the night. The village was quiet, and a sense of peace settled over Amale as she walked beside her friend. That night, as Amale lay in her bed, she thought about Zanele's words. What if there was someone out there who could give her the love she had always dreamed of, someone who would see her for who she truly was and love her without condition? Amale closed her eyes and allowed herself to dream, just for a moment, of the life she longed for. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months, and still Amale remained unmarried. The villagers continued to gossip, and the elders grew more anxious. But Amale paid them no mind. She knew that if she was meant to find love, it would happen when the time was right. One day, as Amale was walking through the market, she noticed a commotion near the edge of the village. A group of children had gathered around something or someone who had caught their attention. Curious, Amal made her way over to see what was happening. As she approached, she saw that the children were surrounding a stranger, a man who looked unlike anyone Amale had ever seen before. He had smooth, pale skin, and his eyes were a striking shade of brown. His clothes were different too. He wore a long flowing robe that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. The man was smiling as he spoke to the children, his voice soft and melodic. Amal's heart skipped a beat as she watched the scene unfold. There was something about this man that intrigued her, something that drew her in. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she felt a strange connection to him, as if she had known him in another life. The man looked up and caught Amale's gaze. For a moment, their eyes locked, and Amale felt a jolt of electricity run through her. She quickly looked away, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. She had never reacted to anyone like this before, and it left her feeling both excited and confused. The man made his way over to Amale, his smile warm and genuine. "Hello," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I am Jinhyuk, a traveler from a distant land. I have come to your village to learn about your culture and to share my own. May I ask your name?" Amale hesitated for a moment, still trying to make sense of the feelings swirling inside her. But then she took a deep breath and replied, "My name is Amale. Welcome to our village, Jinhyuk." Jinhyuk's smile widened. "Thank you, Amale. It is an honor to meet you." Amale felt a strange flutter in her chest as Jinhyuk spoke her name. There was something in the way he said it that made her feel special, as if he truly saw her for who she was. She had never met anyone like him before, and she found herself wanting to know more about him. Over the next few days, Jinhyuk became a regular presence in the village. He was eager to learn about the customs and traditions of Amale's people, and he spent his days talking with the elders, helping the villagers with their daily tasks, and sharing stories of his own homeland. The villagers were fascinated by Jinhyuk's tales of faraway places, and they welcomed him with open arms. Amale found herself drawn to Jinhyuk in a way she had never been drawn to anyone before. He was kind, intelligent, and respectful, and he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her. The two of them spent many hours together, walking through the fields, sitting by the river, and talking about everything under the sun. As the days passed, Amale began to realize that she was falling in love with Jinhyuk. It was a feeling unlike anything she had ever experienced before, pure, deep, and all-consuming. She knew that Jinhyuk felt the same way about her, but she was afraid to admit it, even to herself. She had always been so careful with her heart, and the thought of giving it to someone she had just met was both exhilarating and terrifying. One evening, as the sun was setting, Jinhyuk and Amale sat together on a hill overlooking the village. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers. Jinhyuk turned to Amale, his expression serious. "Amale," he began, "I have traveled to many places in my life, but I have never met anyone like you. You are strong, kind, and wise, and I find myself drawn to you in ways I cannot explain. I know that we come from different worlds, but I believe that we were meant to find each other." Amale's heart raced as she listened to Jinhyuk's words. She knew that this was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when she would have to decide whether to take a leap of faith or let her fear hold her back. With a trembling voice, she replied, "Jinhyuk, I feel the same way. I have spent my whole life waiting for a love like this, a love that is true and pure. But I am afraid. I'm afraid of what the future holds, and I'm afraid of losing myself in this love." Jinhyuk took her hand in his touch gentle and reassuring. "Amale, love is always a risk, but it is a risk worth taking. We cannot know what the future holds, but we can choose to face it together. I promise you, I will do everything in my power to protect you and to love you with all my heart." Amale looked into Jinhyuk's eyes, and in that moment, she knew that she could trust him. She knew that he was the one she had been waiting for, the one who would walk beside her through life, no matter where the journey took them. With a deep breath, Amale made her decision. "Jinhyuk, I choose you. I choose to take this journey with you, wherever it may lead." Jinhyuk's face lit up with joy, and he pulled Amale into his arms. "Thank you, Amale," he whispered. "I will not let you down." As they stood together on the hill, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Amale felt a sense of peace and happiness that she had never known before. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but she was ready to face it as long as she had Jinhyuk by her side. As the days passed, the villagers began to notice the bond growing between Amale and Jinhyuk. Whispers filled the air, spreading from house to house like wildfire. Some were delighted by the blossoming connection, seeing it as a sign of good fortune. Others, however, were wary of the outsider and his influence on Amale. The elders in particular grew concerned. They gathered in the village square where the old baobab tree stood tall, its ancient branches stretching toward the sky. Beneath its shade, they discussed the matter with furrowed brows and hushed voices. "Amale has always been a beacon of hope for our people. one elder said, his voice heavy with the weight of responsibility. But this foreigner, he is not like us. His ways are unknown, his intentions unclear. Another elder, her face lined with years of wisdom, nodded in agreement. We cannot deny that Amale's spirit is strong, but we must protect her and our village from any harm that may come from this union. We must learn more about this man. As the discussion continued, a plan began to take shape. The elders decided to observe Jinhyuk closely, to see if his presence would bring blessings or curses to their community. They would not intervene directly, but they would be vigilant, ready to act if necessary. Meanwhile, Amale and Jinhyuk were unaware of the elders' concerns. They continued to spend their days together, exploring the beauty of the village and its surroundings. Jinhyuk was enchanted by the rich culture and traditions of Amale's people, and he listened intently as she shared stories passed down through generations. One evening, as they sat by the river under the soft glow of the moon, Jinhyuk spoke of his homeland. He told Amale about the mountains that touched the clouds, the vibrant cities filled with life, and the serene temples where one could find peace and solitude. His words painted vivid pictures in Amale's mind, stirring her imagination. "You come from a land of wonders," Amale said softly, her gaze fixed on the shimmering water. "It sounds so different from our village, yet there is a beauty in your stories that feels familiar, like a distant melody I've always known." Jinhyuk smiled, a gentle warmth in his eyes. "Our worlds may be different, but they are connected by the same thread of life. The same stars that shine above your village also light the skies of my homeland. We are not so different after all." Amale's heart swelled with a mixture of emotions, curiosity, longing, and an unspoken fear of the unknown. She had always been content in her village, surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of home. But now, with Jinhyuk by her side, she felt a stirring within her, a desire to see the world beyond the hills and forests she had always known. As they sat in silence, a cool breeze swept through the trees, carrying with it the scent of distant rain. Amale shivered, feeling a strange unease settle over her. Jinhyuk noticed the change in her demeanor and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "What troubles you, Amale?" She hesitated, unsure of how to voice the feelings swirling inside her. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am afraid, Jinhyuk, afraid of what lies ahead. My heart tells me to trust you, to follow this path wherever it may lead. But my mind is filled with doubts, and I cannot silence them." Jinhyuk's expression softened, and he pulled Amale closer, offering her comfort. "Fear is natural, Amale. It is a part of who we are. But we cannot let it control us. We must face it together with courage and hope. Whatever comes, we will face it as one." Amale closed her eyes, letting the sound of Jinhyuk's voice soothe her worries. In that moment, she realized that she was no longer alone in her journey. She had found a partner who would stand by her side no matter what challenges lay ahead. The days continued to pass, and the bond between Amale and Jinhyuk grew stronger. Yet the tension in the village also grew. The elders watched with keen eyes, noting every interaction, every change in the wind. They consulted the village seer, an elderly woman known for her visions and her connection to the spirits. The seer lived on the outskirts of the village, in a small hut surrounded by herbs and ancient symbols. When the elders arrived, they found her seated by a fire, her eyes closed in deep concentration. The flames flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Without opening her eyes, the seer spoke, her voice raspy and filled with an otherworldly quality. "I have seen what you seek, and I have felt the presence of the one you fear. His heart is pure, but his path is shrouded in darkness. There is much at stake, and the choices made in the coming days will shape the fate of not just this village, but the world beyond." The elders exchanged worried glances, unsure of what to make of the seer's cryptic words. But they knew better than to dismiss her warnings. They left her hut with heavy hearts, uncertain of what the future would bring. As the village prepared for the annual harvest festival, an event that brought together people from neighboring communities, the air was thick with anticipation. The festival was a time of celebration, but this year there was an undercurrent of tension that could not be ignored. Amale and Jinhyuk helped with the preparations, working side by side with the villagers. They wove intricate patterns into the decorations, prepared food for the feast, and practiced the traditional dances that would be performed under the light of the full moon. Despite the festive atmosphere, Amale could not shake the feeling that something was amiss. She noticed the way the villagers glanced at her and Jinyuk, their expressions a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Even Zanele, who had always been supportive of Amale, seemed distant and preoccupied. On the day of the festival, the village square was transformed into a vibrant scene of color and music. The smell of roasted meat and fresh fruit filled the air, and the sound of drums echoed through the night. People danced and sang, their spirits lifted by the celebration. But as the night wore on, the sense of unease grew stronger. Amale found herself standing at the edge of the square, watching the festivities with a heavy heart. Jinyuk joined her, his presence a comforting anchor in the midst of the chaos. "Amale, I can feel the tension around us," Jinyuk said quietly, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Something is not right. We must be careful." Amale nodded, her instincts telling her the same. She could feel the weight of the village's expectations pressing down on her, the burden of their fears and doubts. Suddenly, a loud crack of thunder echoed across the sky, followed by a blinding flash of lightning. The festivities came to an abrupt halt as a torrential downpour began, drenching everyone in moments. The villagers scrambled for cover, their laughter and joy replaced by confusion and fear. Amale and Jinhyuk stood in the rain, their clothes soaked through, but they did not move. They knew that this storm was more than just a natural occurrence. It was a sign, a warning from the spirits that the time for decisions had come. As the storm raged on, the elders gathered once more under the baobab tree, their faces grim. They knew that the moment they had feared was upon them. The seer's words echoed in their minds, and they realized that the fate of the village rested in the hands of Amale and Jinhyuk. With the rain pouring down around them, Amale and Jinhyuk made their way to the baobab tree, where the elders waited. The air was thick with tension, and the sound of the storm was deafening. One of the elders stepped forward, his voice strong despite the howling wind. "Amale, you have brought this man into our village, and with him you have brought change. The spirits have spoken, and we must now decide the path we will take. Will you stand by him, even if it means defying our traditions?" Amale looked at Jinhyuk, her heart filled with both love and fear. She knew that this was the moment that would define their future. Taking a deep breath, she turned to face the elders. "I will stand by him," Amale declared, her voice unwavering. "I will honor our traditions, but I will not turn my back on love. Jinyuk and I are meant to be together, and I believe that our union will bring strength, not harm, to our people." The elders exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of surprise and contemplation. Finally, the elder who had spoken nodded slowly. "Very well, Amale. We will not stand in your way, but know this. The path you have chosen is fraught with danger. You must be prepared for whatever challenges may come." Amal bowed her head in acknowledgement, feeling a mixture of relief and determination. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but she was ready to face it, as long as she had Jinhyuk by her side. As the storm began to subside, the villagers emerged from their shelters, their eyes filled with curiosity and apprehension. They knew that something had changed, that a new chapter had begun in the history of their village. Amale and Jinhyuk stood together under the baobab tree, the rain slowing to a gentle drizzle. The storm had passed, but its impact would be felt for years to come. And as they looked out at the faces of their people, they knew that their love would be tested, but it would also be their greatest strength. The night was far from over, and the journey they had begun together was just beginning. The sun rose slowly the next morning, its golden rays piercing through the lingering clouds that had blanketed the village overnight. The storm had left the earth soaked, with puddles of water reflecting the morning light like scattered jewels. Birds cautiously resumed their songs, their melodies tentative, as if sensing the unease that still hung in the air. Amale woke with a heavy heart, the weight of the previous night's events pressing down on her chest. She lay still for a moment, listening to the distant sound of the village stirring to life. Jinhyuk lay beside her, his breathing steady and calm, a stark contrast to the turmoil that raged within her. She had made her choice, standing firm before the elders and the village, but doubt now crept into her mind like a persistent shadow. The path she had chosen was uncharted, and the future seemed more uncertain than ever. The memory of the storm, the way it had come so suddenly and fiercely, felt like an omen, a reminder that the forces at play were beyond her control. Amale slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Jinhyuk, and made her way outside. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the fresh scent of rain-soaked earth. She walked barefoot through the village, her feet sinking slightly into the damp soil with each step. The village was quiet, the usual morning bustle subdued, as if the villagers too were contemplating the events of the night before. She found herself at the edge of the river, where the water flowed gently, its surface still swollen from the downpour. Amale knelt beside the riverbank, dipping her fingers into the cool water, as if seeking solace in its steady flow. She watched as the ripples spread out in delicate circles, a simple yet profound reminder of how every action, every choice, had far-reaching consequences. As she sat in quiet reflection, Zanele appeared, her presence as familiar as the river itself. Amale hadn't seen her friend since the festival, and there was a tension between them that had never existed before. Zanele's eyes were filled with concern, and she approached Amale slowly, as if unsure of how to begin. "Amale," Zanele finally spoke, her voice soft yet tinged with urgency. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened. I worry for you, my friend. The village is uneasy, and the elders, they are not convinced that this is the right path for you." Amale looked up at Zanele, the weight of her friend's words settling heavily on her. "I know," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I cannot turn away from what I feel. Jinhyuk he is different, Zanele. He sees me for who I am, not just as someone to marry, but as an equal, a partner." Zanele sighed and sat down beside Amale, her gaze fixed on the flowing water. "I understand that, Amale. I see how he looks at you, and I know that his feelings are genuine. But love is not the only thing at stake here. The village is afraid of change, afraid of what they do not understand. And the storm, it felt like a warning, a sign that the spirits are not pleased." Amale shivered at the mention of the storm, the memory of the thunder and lightning still fresh in her mind. She had felt it too, a sense of foreboding that had not fully left her, but she also knew that fear could cloud judgment, that the unknown often inspired more dread than it deserved. "Zanele," Amale said, turning to face her friend, "I cannot let fear dictate my life. I have always trusted the spirits, and I believe they are guiding us, even if the way forward is unclear. I need you to trust me, to trust that I am making the right choice." Zanele met Amale's gaze, her eyes searching for something, reassurance perhaps or conviction. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. "I trust you, Amale. I always have. But promise me that you will be careful, that you will listen to the signs around you. The spirits may be guiding you, but they can also test you." Amale smiled faintly, grateful for Zanele's support despite her concerns. "I promise, Zanele. I will not ignore the signs, and I will be cautious. But I cannot turn away from this path, not now." Zanele reached out and took Amale's hand, squeezing it gently. The simple gesture of solidarity gave Amale the strength she needed, a reminder that she was not entirely alone in this. As the two friends sat by the river, the sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the earth and drying the remnants of the night's rain. The village began to come alive again, the villagers resuming their daily routines, though a lingering unease remained. Amale knew that she needed to speak with Jinhyuk, to share her thoughts and doubts, and to hear his perspective. They had faced the storm together, but the real challenges were only just beginning. She made her way back to their small home, her resolve strengthening with each step. When she arrived, Jinhyuk was already awake, sitting outside with a thoughtful expression on his face. He looked up as Amale approached, his eyes softening with warmth as they met hers. "Amale," he said, his voice carrying both relief and concern. "I was worried when I woke and you were gone. Is everything all right?" Amale sat down beside him, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. "I went to the river," she explained. "I needed time to think, to clear my mind. There's so much happening, Jinhyuk. The village is uncertain, the elders are watching us closely, and the storm, it feels like a sign that we must be cautious." Jinhyuk nodded, his expression serious. "I understand, Amale. I have felt it too. The weight of their expectations, the fear of what we represent. But I believe in what we have, in the connection we share. It is rare and precious, something that should not be dismissed because of fear." Amale sighed, resting her head on Jinhyuk's shoulder. "I want to believe that everything will be all right, that love is enough to overcome the challenges we face. But I am afraid of what might come, of the consequences of our choices." Jinhyuk wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. "Amale, love is not just a feeling. It is a choice, a commitment to stand by each other no matter what. We will face challenges, but we will do so together, and whatever comes, we will find a way through it. Amale closed her eyes, allowing herself to draw strength from Jin Hyuk's words. He was right. They had chosen each other, and with that choice came a responsibility to face whatever trials lay ahead, side by side. The day passed quietly, the village slowly returning to its usual rhythm, though the tension still lingered beneath the surface. Amale and Jin Hyuk spent the day working together, sharing stories and laughter, trying to find moments of normalcy amidst the uncertainty. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the village, a figure appeared on the horizon, approaching from the direction of the mountains. Amale noticed it first, her keen eyes catching the movement against the backdrop of the darkening sky. She squinted, trying to make out who it might be. The figure drew closer, revealing itself to be a man, tall and lean, with a purposeful stride. He wore simple clothing, but there was something about him that commanded attention, a quiet strength, an air of authority. Amale's heart skipped a beat as she realized this was no ordinary visitor. The man approached the village gates, and the elders, sensing his arrival, gathered to meet him. Amale and Jin Hyuk stood at a distance, watching as the man exchanged words with the elders. His expression was calm, his demeanor respectful, yet there was an intensity in his gaze that hinted at deeper intentions. After a brief conversation, the elders turned and gestured for Amale and Jin Hyuk to approach. They exchanged a glance, both feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. As they drew near, the man turned to face them, his eyes locking onto Amale's with a piercing gaze. "You must be Amale," the man said, his voice steady and strong. "And you, Jin Hyuk, the traveler from a distant land. My name is Mandla, and I have come to offer my assistance." Amale felt a chill run down her spine at the man's words. There was something about him that unsettled her, though she couldn't quite place it. "Assistance," she echoed, unsure of what he meant. Mandla nodded, his expression serious. "I am a guardian of our people's traditions, a keeper of the old ways. The spirits have sent me here to guide you, to help you navigate the challenges that lie ahead. Your union has stirred forces both seen and unseen, and it is my duty to ensure that balance is maintained." Jin Hyuk stepped forward, his brow furrowed in concern. "What do you mean, Mandla? What challenges do you speak of?" Mandla's gaze shifted to Jin Hyuk, his eyes narrowing slightly. "There are forces at play that you do not yet understand, Jin Hyuk. Forces that have been awakened by your presence here. The spirits are watching closely, and they will test you both. You must be prepared for what is to come, for the path you have chosen is not an easy one." Amale's heart raced as she listened to Mandla's words, the weight of his message sinking in. She had always trusted in the guidance of the spirits, but this was something beyond anything she had anticipated. The arrival of Mandla signaled a turning point, a shift in the delicate balance that had held the village together for generations. Mandla's presence, with his quiet authority and his connection to the spirits, added a new layer of complexity to their situation. Amale knew that they would need to tread carefully, that every decision they made would be scrutinized by forces beyond their control. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the village, Amale and Jin Hyuk stood side by side, facing Mandla. The air was thick with anticipation, the calm before the storm that they both sensed was coming. Mandla's eyes flickered with an unreadable emotion as he spoke once more, his voice low and deliberate. "The spirits will speak to you in ways that are not always clear. They may come in dreams, in signs, in the whispers of the wind. Listen to them, heed their warnings, and above all, remain true to each other." With that, Mandla turned and walked away, leaving Amale and Jin Hyuk standing in the growing darkness, the weight of his words settling over them like a heavy cloak. Amale looked up at Jin Hyuk, her heart filled with both determination and fear. They had stepped into a world where the stakes were higher than they had ever imagined, where the choices they made would ripple through their lives and the lives of those around them. But no matter what challenges lay ahead, Amale knew that they would face them together, with courage, with love, and with an unshakable bond that had brought them to this point. And as they turned to walk back to their home, the first stars of the night began to twinkle in the sky, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always light to guide their way. The first light of dawn crept across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. The village stirred to life, but there was a palpable tension in the air. Amale awoke with a sense of heaviness in her chest, as though the weight of the world had settled upon her overnight. The events of the previous day lingered in her mind, Mandla's words echoing like a distant drumbeat. She dressed quietly, her movements slow and deliberate, and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The earth was still damp from the recent rains, and the smell of wet soil mixed with the fragrance of blooming wildflowers. Amale's thoughts were a tangled web, but she knew she couldn't afford to be paralyzed by doubt. Jinyuk was already awake, sitting by the entrance of their home, his face etched with deep thought. He looked up as Amale approached, offering her a small, reassuring smile, though the worry in his eyes was unmistakable. "We need to speak with the elders," Amale said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at her. "They deserve to know what Mandla told us, and we must understand what it means for our people." Jinyuk nodded in agreement, rising to his feet. "You're right. We must be honest with them. This affects not just us, but the entire village." The two made their way to the elders' gathering place beneath the ancient baobab tree. The elders were already there, seated in a circle on mats woven from reeds. Their faces were solemn, their eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. Mandla stood apart from them, his presence both commanding and mysterious. Amale and Jinyuk bowed respectfully before taking their places within the circle. The silence stretched, heavy and expectant, until one of the elders finally spoke. "Amale, Jinyuk," the elder began, his voice filled with a quiet authority. "We have watched you closely, and we have listened to Mandla's words. The spirits have sent him to guide us, and we must heed their will. But we also wish to hear from you. What do you understand of the task that lies before you?" Amale took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "We know that our union has stirred forces that were once at rest. The spirits are watching us, testing us. We must prove ourselves worthy, not just to each other, but to our ancestors and to this land." Jinhyuk added, "We believe that our bond is meant to bring harmony, to bridge the divide between our different worlds. But we also know that this will not be easy. The path ahead is unclear, and we will need your wisdom and guidance." The elders exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Then Mandla stepped forward, his presence commanding the attention of everyone gathered. "The spirits are not easily swayed," Mandla said, his voice deep and resonant. "They demand respect, and they will test you in ways you cannot yet imagine. You must be vigilant, for the challenges will come from within and from forces beyond your control." Amal felt a shiver run down her spine. The weight of Mandla's words settled heavily on her, and she knew that this was only the beginning. But she also felt a surge of determination, a resolve to face whatever lay ahead with courage and strength. One of the elder women, her face lined with years of wisdom, spoke up. "Amale, Jinyuk, you must seek the counsel of the ancestors. They hold the knowledge of our people, the secrets of the past that can guide you. Tonight, you will go to the sacred grove, where the veil between the living and the dead is thin. There, you will make an offering and seek their guidance." The sacred grove was a place of great reverence, a secluded area deep within the forest where the spirits of the ancestors were believed to dwell. It was a place where few dared to go, for it was said that those who entered uninvited would never return. But for Amale and Jinhyuk, the grove offered a chance to commune with the spirits, to seek their blessing and their wisdom. That evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the village, Amale and Jinhyuk prepared for the journey to the grove. They gathered the necessary offerings, gifts of fruit, incense, and herbs that would please the ancestors. The villagers watched silently as they made their way to the edge of the forest, their expressions a mix of hope and fear. The forest was dense and alive with the sounds of night creatures stirring in the underbrush. Amale led the way, her heart pounding with both anticipation and trepidation. Jinyuk followed closely, his presence a steadying force in the gathering darkness. As they walked deeper into the forest, the air grew cooler, the light dimmer. The trees loomed tall and ancient, their branches intertwined like the fingers of the ancestors reaching out to touch the living. The path was narrow and winding, and soon the familiar sounds of the village faded into silence, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. Finally, they reached the entrance to the sacred grove, marked by a ring of ancient stones covered in moss. The air within the grove was thick with the scent of earth and incense, and a deep sense of reverence filled the space. Amale and Jinhyuk stepped into the circle of stones, their steps slow and deliberate, as if crossing an invisible threshold between the worlds of the living and the dead. They knelt before the central stone, a large, flat rock that served as an altar. Amale carefully placed the offerings upon it, her hands trembling slightly. Jin-hyuk lit the incense, and the fragrant smoke curled upwards, disappearing into the night sky. Together, they bowed their heads in silent prayer, calling upon the spirits of their ancestors for guidance, for strength, for the wisdom to navigate the path that lay before them. For a long time there was only silence, the air heavy with the weight of their hopes and fears. Then slowly the wind began to stir, rustling the leaves and carrying with it a soft, whispering sound. It was a voice, ancient and distant, yet clear and unmistakable. "Amahle, child of this land," the voice spoke deep and resonant, like the rumble of distant thunder. "Jin-hyuk, traveler from afar, you have come seeking our counsel, and we have heard your plea. The path you walk is not an easy one, but it is one that must be walked. The union of your hearts has awakened forces that have lain dormant for generations." The voice paused, and Amal felt a chill pass through her, as though the very air around them had come alive with the presence of the ancestors. "You are the bridge," the voice continued, "between the old ways and the new, between what was and what will be. But you must remember that balance is key. The spirits do not tolerate imbalance, and if you are to succeed, you must honor both the traditions of the past and the possibilities of the future." Amale's heart swelled with emotion, her mind racing to grasp the meaning of the words. She felt a deep connection to the ancestors, as though their wisdom was flowing through her, filling her with a sense of purpose and clarity. Jin-hyuk too felt the power of the words, the weight of the responsibility they carried. He knew that this was not just about their love, but about something much greater, a bond that had the potential to heal old wounds, to unite their worlds in a way that had never been done before. The voice of the ancestors grew softer, fading into the wind. "Go now with our blessing, but remember, the challenges ahead are many, and the path is long. You must remain true to each other and to the spirits who guide you." As the final words echoed through the grove, the wind died down, and the silence returned. Amale and Jin-hyuk slowly rose to their feet, their hearts filled with a sense of awe and reverence. They had received the guidance they sought, but the weight of their task was now clearer than ever. They left the sacred grove in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The forest was quiet as they made their way back to the village, the night now deep and still. When they finally emerged from the trees, the village was bathed in the soft light of the moon, the stars twinkling overhead like the eyes of the ancestors watching over them. Amal knew that their journey was far from over. The challenges that lay ahead would test not only their love but their strength, their resolve, and their connection to the spirits of the land. But she also knew that they were not alone. The ancestors were with them, guiding them, and as long as they honored that connection, they would find a way forward. Jin-hyuk squeezed her hand gently as they walked, a silent promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. The village was quiet as they returned, the houses dark and still, the only sound the soft rustle of the wind in the trees. As they stepped into their home, Amale felt a deep sense of calm wash over her. The night had been long and the road ahead uncertain, but she knew that they had taken the first step on a path that would shape their lives and the lives of their people for generations to come. With the rain pouring down around them, Amale and Jin-hyuk made their way to the baobab tree, where the elders waited. The air was thick with tension, and the sound of the storm was deafening. One of the elders stepped forward, his voice strong despite the howling wind. "Amale, you have brought this man into our village, and with him you have brought change. The spirits have spoken, and we must now decide the path we will take. Will you stand by him, even if it means defying our traditions?" Amale looked at Jin-hyuk, her heart filled with both love and fear. She knew that this was the moment that would define their future. Taking a deep breath, she turned to face the elders. "I will stand by him," Amale declared, her voice unwavering. "I will honor our traditions, but I will not turn my back on love. Jin-hyuk and I are meant to be together, and I believe that our union will bring strength, not harm, to our people." The elders exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of surprise and contemplation. Finally, the elder who had spoken nodded slowly. "Very well, Amale. We will not stand in your way, but know this. The path you have chosen is fraught with danger. You must be prepared for whatever challenges may come." Amal bowed her head in acknowledgement, feeling a mixture of relief and determination. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but she was ready to face it, as long as she had Jin-hyuk by her side. As the storm began to subside, the villagers emerged from their shelters, their eyes filled with curiosity and apprehension. They knew that something had changed, that a new chapter had begun in the history of their village. Amale and Jinhyuk stood together under the baobab tree, the rain slowing to a gentle drizzle. The storm had passed, but its impact would be felt for years to come. And as they looked out at the faces of their people, they knew that their love would be tested, but it would also be their greatest strength. The night was far from over, and the journey they had begun together was just beginning. And as she lay down to sleep, she felt the presence of the ancestors, a comforting weight that settled over her like a warm blanket, reminding her that they were never truly alone. The spirits were watching, guiding, and protecting them. And with that knowledge, Amale closed her eyes and drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep, ready for whatever the new day would bring. The days that followed their visit to the sacred grove were filled with a quiet tension, like the stillness before a storm. Amale and Jinhyuk went about their daily tasks, but there was a sense that the village was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The elders had retreated into a solemn watchfulness, their eyes ever observant, their words measured and few. Mandla too remained in the village, his presence a constant reminder of the delicate balance they were trying to maintain. He moved through the village with the calm assurance of someone who knew more than he revealed, his every step deliberate, his gaze ever watchful. The villagers respected him, but there was an undercurrent of unease, as though they feared what his presence truly meant. Amale and Jinhyuk knew that the time for action was approaching, though neither could say what form it would take. They had been warned by the ancestors that their bond would be tested, that forces would arise to challenge their resolve. The uncertainty gnawed at them, but they were determined to face whatever came their way, confident in the strength of their connection. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the village, a stranger appeared at the edge of the clearing. He was a tall man, with broad shoulders and a stern face, his skin as dark as the earth after rain. His clothes were simple, but he wore them with the pride of one who knew his own strength. He carried a spear in one hand and a shield in the other, and his eyes, though weary, gleamed with determination. The villagers gathered quickly, murmuring among themselves as they watched the newcomer approach. Amale and Jinhyuk were among them, standing side by side as the man entered the circle. Mandla, who had been quietly observing from a distance, stepped forward to greet the stranger. "Who are you, and what brings you to our village?" Mandla's voice was calm, but there was a hint of challenge in his tone. The man bowed his head respectfully, his expression grave. "My name is Tulani, and I come from the village of the Great River. I seek the one called Amale, for it is said that she holds the key to a great power. My people are in need, and I have come to ask for her help." Amale felt a ripple of surprise run through her. She had never heard of Tulani or his village, but the urgency in his voice spoke of a deep and pressing need. She stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "I am Amale," she said, her voice steady. "Tell me what has happened." Tulani looked at her with a mix of hope and desperation. "Our village has been struck by a terrible drought. The river that once sustained us has run dry, and our crops are failing. The elders have prayed to the spirits, but the rains do not come. We have heard of your connection to the ancestors, and we believe that you have the power to bring back the waters." The villagers murmured in astonishment, their eyes shifting to Amale with a mixture of awe and expectation. Amale herself was taken aback. She had always felt a deep connection to the land and the spirits, but she had never considered herself to possess the kind of power that Tulani described. Before she could respond, Mandla spoke, his voice filled with the weight of authority. "The spirits have chosen Amale, but the power she holds is not one to be wielded lightly. To bring back the waters is to invoke the forces of nature itself, and such a task requires more than just will. It requires sacrifice and a heart pure in purpose." Tulani's face fell, but he did not back down. "I understand the risks, but my people are suffering. I am willing to do whatever it takes to save them." Amale looked into Tulani's eyes and saw the pain of his people reflected there. She knew that she could not turn her back on them, not when there was even a chance that she could help. But she also knew that this would not be a simple task. The spirits would demand more than just her desire. They would demand a test of her resolve, of her heart. "I will do what I can," Amale said finally, her voice firm with determination. "But I will need guidance, and I will need the support of my people." Mandla nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Very well. The spirits have spoken through Tulani's plea, and we must heed their call. But before you can undertake this task, you must prepare yourself. There is a place deep within the forest where the veil between the worlds is thinnest. There, you will find the answers you seek. Amale's mind raced with the implications of Mandla's words. The place he spoke of was known in the village as the Hollow of Spirits, a sacred and forbidden site where the bravest only dared to go. It was said that those who entered the hollow would confront not only the spirits of the land, but their own deepest fears. Jinyuk stepped forward, his face set with determination. I will go with you, Amali. We will face this together. Mandla shook his head slowly. No, Jinyuk, the hollow is a place of solitude. Amali must face this trial alone. Only she can undertake this task, for it is her heart that the spirits will judge. Amale felt a pang of fear at the thought of entering the hollow alone, but she knew that Mandla was right. This was something she had to do by herself, a test of her strength and her connection to the ancestors. I understand, Amale said, looking at Jinyuk with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. I must do this alone, but knowing you are with me in spirit will give me the strength I need. Jinyuk nodded, his eyes filled with love and concern. I will be waiting for you when you return, Amali. Trust in yourself and in the spirits that guide you. The following day, Amali prepared herself for the task ahead. She fasted, cleansed herself in the river, and spent time in prayer, asking the spirits for their guidance and protection. The villagers watched her in silence, their faces reflecting the hope and fear that had taken hold of them. When the time came, Amali set out for the Hollow of Spirits. The forest was dense and alive with the sounds of nature, but as she walked deeper into the woods, the noises grew distant, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. The path was narrow and winding, lined with ancient trees whose gnarled branches reached out like skeletal hands. After what felt like hours, Amahle reached the entrance to the hollow. It was a small clearing, surrounded by a circle of towering trees, their roots intertwining in a way that seemed to form a natural gateway. The air within the hollow was thick with an otherworldly energy, and Amali felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She stepped into the clearing, her heart pounding in her chest. The world around her seemed to blur, the trees swaying gently as though in response to a breeze she could not feel. Amal knelt in the center of the clearing, her hands pressed together in supplication, and began to pray. As she prayed, the world around her began to change. The light dimmed, and a mist rose from the ground, swirling around her like a living thing. The air grew colder, and Amal felt a presence, a deep, ancient force that watched her, weighed her, judged her. The mist thickened, and within it, shapes began to form. Shadows moved around her, taking on the forms of figures long past, warriors, healers, elders, each one a part of the lineage that had brought her to this moment. The ancestors had come to test her, to see if she was worthy of the task that lay ahead. One by one, the figures approached her, their faces obscured by the mist, their voices low and resonant. They spoke in the language of the spirits, words that Amali felt more than heard, their meaning sinking deep into her soul. Why do you seek to bring back the waters? One figure asked, its voice like the rustle of leaves in the wind. Because the people are suffering, Amali replied, her voice trembling but firm. They have lost hope, and they look to me for guidance. I cannot turn away from their need. Another figure stepped forward, its eyes glowing with a faint ethereal light. What are you willing to sacrifice to achieve this? Amali hesitated, the weight of the question pressing down on her. She thought of her life, of Jinhyuk, of all that she had worked to build, but she knew that this was about more than just her own desires. It was about the greater good, about the responsibility she bore as a daughter of the land. I am willing to give whatever is required of me, she said finally, her voice strong with conviction. If it means saving the lives of others, I will make the necessary sacrifice. The figures retreated into the mist, and the silence returned, heavy and expectant. Amale remained kneeling, her heart pounding in her chest, waiting for the final judgment. Then the mist parted, revealing a single figure standing before her. It was the oldest of the ancestors, a figure shrouded in the wisdom of ages, its face lined with the marks of time and experience. The ancestor's eyes met Amale's, and she felt a deep connection, as though the very essence of her being was being laid bare. You have spoken true, the ancestor said, its voice filled with a mixture of sadness and approval. The spirits will grant you the power to bring back the waters, but know this. The path you walk will not be easy. The sacrifice you offer will be accepted, but it will come at a great cost. Are you prepared to face the consequences? Amale's breath caught in her throat, but she nodded resolutely. I am prepared. Whatever the cost, I will bear it. The ancestor reached out, placing a hand on Amale's forehead. A surge of energy coursed through her, filling her with a warmth that spread from her head to her toes. She felt the power of the ancestors, the strength of the land flowing into her, connecting her to the earth, to the waters, to the spirits themselves. When the hand was withdrawn, Amale opened her eyes. The mist had cleared, the figures of the ancestors fading back into the shadows. She was alone once more, standing in the hollow of spirits, but she felt different, stronger, wiser, and filled with a sense of purpose that burned brightly within her. Amale knew what she had to do. She turned and left the hollow, her steps sure and steady as she made her way back to the village. The power of the ancestors pulsed within her, guiding her, filling her with the knowledge that she was not alone. The spirits were with her, and with their help, she would bring back the waters and save Tulani's people. As she emerged from the forest, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, bathing the village in a golden glow. Amale felt the warmth of the sun on her face, and she knew that the trials were far from over, but she also knew that she had been chosen for this task, and she would not fail. The village awaited her return, their faces filled with hope and fear. Amale looked at them, at Jinhyuk who stood among them, his eyes filled with love and trust, and she knew that she was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The ancestors had spoken, and she would honor their will. The village gathered in the square as the sun climbed high into the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. Amale stood at the center, her presence commanding and calm. She could feel the weight of expectation in the air, the collective breath of her people held in anticipation of what was to come. Jinhyuk stood close by, his eyes fixed on Amale, a silent pillar of support. Tulani was beside him, his face a mixture of hope and desperation, the burden of his people's plight visible in every line of his body. The villagers formed a wide circle around them, their faces etched with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Mandla watched from the edge of the gathering, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp and focused. He had seen much in his time, but even he could not fully predict what was about to unfold. Amale raised her arms, and the village fell into a deep, expectant silence. She felt the power granted to her by the ancestors, a warm current of energy flowing through her veins, filling her with a sense of purpose that was both exhilarating and humbling. The task before her was immense, but she knew that it was her destiny to fulfill it. She began to speak, her voice steady and clear, carrying over the crowd with a resonance that commanded attention. The spirits have heard our prayers and have granted us the means to bring back the waters, but this is not a gift to be taken lightly. The ancestors have warned me that it will come at a cost. We must be prepared to face the consequences of this act, whatever they may be. A murmur ran through the crowd, a mixture of fear and curiosity. But there was also a deep sense of trust in Amale, a belief that she could succeed where others might falter. Amale turned to face the ancient baobab tree that stood at the edge of the village, its gnarled branches reaching skyward like the arms of a wise elder. The tree had stood there for as long as anyone could remember, a symbol of the village's enduring strength and connection to the land. She approached the tree, her movements slow and deliberate, as if each step was a ritual in itself. At the base of the tree was a small shallow well, its waters long since dried up. This well had once been the lifeblood of the village, providing water in times of need, but it had been dry for years, a silent testament to the changing fortunes of the land. Amale knelt beside the well, her hands hovering over the cracked earth. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to sink into a deep meditation, reaching out with her spirit to the ancestors, to the land, to the waters that had once flowed freely beneath the surface. The village watched in rapt silence as Amale began to chant, her voice a low, melodic hum that resonated with the earth beneath her. The words were ancient, passed down through generations, a prayer to the spirits of the land and water. As she chanted, the air around her seemed to thicken, the temperature dropping slightly, a cool breeze stirring the dust at her feet. The ground beneath the baobab tree trembled slightly, and a faint, almost imperceptible sound of water moving deep within the earth reached the ears of the villagers. Amale's voice grew stronger, the chant rising in intensity, as if she were calling out to the very soul of the land itself. Suddenly, there was a loud crack, like the sound of a stone splitting open. The villagers gasped as the ground beneath the well began to shift, the dry earth parting as something ancient and powerful stirred beneath the surface. A moment later, a small trickle of water emerged from the well, clear and cold, bubbling up from the depths of the earth. The trickle quickly became a stream, then a steady flow. As the water began to fill the well, the surface of the water catching the light of the midday sun and sparkling like liquid silver. A collective gasp of amazement and relief swept through the crowd as the water continued to rise, spilling over the edges of the well and spreading across the dry ground, creating small rivulets that wound their way through the village. Amale remained kneeling by the well, her hands still raised, her voice still chanting, though now it was softer, more of a murmur, as if she were speaking directly to the water, guiding it, coaxing it to flow freely once more. The water spread out across the village, seeping into the parched soil, reviving the dry grasses and plants that had long since withered in the drought. The villagers watched in awe as the once dry and cracked earth began to soften and turn a rich dark brown, the water soaking deep into the ground. For a moment, it seemed as if the entire village was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Then, with a final deep sigh, the water settled into a slow, steady flow, filling the well to the brim and then spilling out in all directions, a gentle river of life coursing through the heart of the village. Amale slowly lowered her hands, her chant fading into silence. She opened her eyes, taking in the sight before her, the well overflowing with clear, sparkling water, the villagers standing in stunned silence, and the land itself coming back to life beneath their feet. Thulani was the first to move, stepping forward and kneeling beside Amale, his hands cupping the water as it flowed over the edges of the well. He brought the water to his lips, drinking deeply, his face a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. "The water, it has returned," Thulani said, his voice choked with emotion. "You have saved us, Amale. You have saved my people." The villagers erupted into cheers, their voices rising in a joyful chorus that echoed through the village and beyond. They rushed forward, eager to touch the water, to feel its cool, life-giving presence on their skin, to drink and give thanks for the miracle that had been wrought in their midst. Amale stood, her legs unsteady, her heart filled with a deep sense of fulfillment. She had done it, the spirits had answered her call, and the waters had returned. But even as the villagers celebrated, Amale felt a deep weariness settling over her. The effort of calling forth the waters, of channeling the power of the ancestors, had taken a toll on her. She knew that the cost the spirits had spoken of was more than just physical. It was something deeper, something that would reveal itself in time. Jinhyuk reached her side, his face filled with both pride and concern. He took her hand in his grip firm and reassuring. "You did it, Amale. The water has returned because of you." Amale nodded, a faint smile on her lips, but there was a shadow in her eyes, a lingering sense that the task was not yet complete, that there was still more to be done, more to be understood. Mandla approached, his expression solemn. "You have brought back the water, Amale, but remember the warning of the ancestors. There will be a price to pay, and you must be prepared for what comes next." Amale met Mandla's gaze, her resolve hardening. She had known from the beginning that this would not be an easy task, that the consequences of her actions would be far-reaching. But she also knew that she had made the right choice, that she had done what was necessary to save her people. The celebration continued long into the night, the villagers rejoicing in the return of the water, the lifeblood of their land. They danced and sang, their voices lifted in praise and gratitude to the spirits and to Amale, who had brought about this miracle. But even as the village celebrated, Amale felt a quiet, persistent unease deep within her. She knew that the true test was yet to come, that the cost of her actions would reveal itself in ways she could not yet foresee. As the night wore on, Amale withdrew from the festivities, seeking solace in the quiet of her home. She sat alone, her thoughts heavy, her mind turning over the events of the day and the warnings of the ancestors. Jinhyuk found her there, his presence a welcome comfort in the silence. He sat beside her, his hand resting on hers, offering support without words. Together, they watched the flickering light of the fire, the shadows dancing on the walls like spirits come to life. The water had returned, and with it, hope had been restored to the village. But the cost remained unknown, a lingering shadow that hung over them like a cloud, waiting to reveal itself in its own time. And as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Amale knew that the journey she had embarked upon was far from over. The spirits had granted her the power to save her people, but the true test was yet to come, a test that would challenge not only her strength but her very soul. The following days were filled with a cautious sense of relief. The return of the waters brought new life to the village, and the people rejoiced in the abundance that now flowed through their fields and gardens. Crops began to sprout with a vigor unseen in years, and the animals, sensing the change in the land, returned to the pastures and forests with renewed energy. The once dry riverbeds filled, and the land, which had been parched and weary, began to thrive again. Amale, however, felt a quiet unease growing within her. Though she had accomplished what she had set out to do, the price of her actions weighed heavily on her mind. The spirits had warned her, and she could not shake the feeling that something unseen lingered on the horizon, waiting to reveal itself. Mandla had remained in the village, watching with a keen eye as the days passed. He spoke little, but his presence was a reminder of the delicate balance that had been struck. Amale could see the concern in his eyes, though he did not voice it aloud. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, Amale decided to seek answers. She left the village quietly, making her way to the river that now flowed freely once more. The water was clear and cool, reflecting the colors of the sunset in its gentle ripples. She knelt by the water's edge, her thoughts heavy as she stared into the depths. "Spirits of the land," Amale whispered, her voice carried by the wind. "I have fulfilled my task, but the cost remains unknown to me. Show me what lies ahead and grant me the strength to face it." The river remained still, its surface unbroken as if holding its breath. For a long time Amale waited, listening to the sounds of the night. The call of the crickets, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. She felt a deep connection to the land, to the water that had been restored, but the silence was unnerving. Then, without warning, the wind picked up, swirling around her with a sudden intensity. The trees swayed, their branches creaking as the wind whipped through them, and the water in the river began to churn. Amale's heart quickened as she realized that the spirits were responding, that her plea had been heard. The wind carried with it whispers, voices that seemed to come from all directions, blending together into a haunting melody. Amale closed her eyes, focusing on the sound, trying to decipher the meaning behind the words. "Amale," the voices called, their tones both gentle and stern. "You have restored the waters, but the balance of the land remains fragile. The sacrifice we spoke of has yet to be made, and the forces you have awakened will demand their due." Amale's breath caught in her throat. She had known there would be a cost, but the finality in the spirit's words sent a chill through her. "What must I do?" she asked, her voice trembling. The wind slowed, the voices softening to a whisper. "The land will take what is needed. You must be prepared to give what you hold most dear. Only then will the balance be truly restored." Amale's mind raced as she tried to grasp the full meaning of the spirit's warning. What could they mean by what you hold most dear? Her thoughts turned to Jinyuk, to her people, to the life she had worked so hard to protect. The realization of what might be required of her settled like a stone in her chest. The wind died down, leaving the night eerily quiet once more. Amale remained by the river, her heart heavy with the knowledge that the true cost of her actions was yet to come. She knew that whatever sacrifice the spirits demanded, it would not be an easy one. As she rose to her feet, the first stars began to appear in the sky, their light faint and distant. Amale made her way back to the village, her steps slow and deliberate, as though each one carried the weight of the world. The celebration of the water's return had been joyous, but Amale could not shake the sense that it was a calm before a storm, that something was coming, something that would change everything. When she reached the village, she found Jinyuk waiting for her. His face was filled with concern, and he quickly crossed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "Amale, what is it?" he asked, searching her eyes for answers. "You look troubled." Amale took a deep breath, steadying herself before speaking. "The spirits have spoken to me. They warned that the balance of the land is still fragile, that a sacrifice is required to restore it fully. I fear that the cost may be greater than we imagined." Jinyuk's brow furrowed, and he pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in a protective embrace. "Whatever comes, we will face it together," he said firmly. "You're not alone in this." Amal leaned into him, grateful for his support, but the unease in her heart remained. She knew that the spirit's words were not to be taken lightly, and the fear of what might be demanded of her weighed heavily on her mind. The days passed, and the village continued to thrive. The people, unaware of the burden Amale carried, went about their lives with a renewed sense of hope. But Amale felt the tension building, like the pressure before a storm. She found herself waking in the middle of the night, unable to shake the feeling that something was drawing closer, something that would require her to make a choice she was not ready to make. One night, as the village slept under a blanket of stars, Amale was awakened by a sound, a low, mournful cry that echoed through the darkness. She sat up, her heart pounding, and listened intently. The cry came again, a sound filled with sorrow and loss, and she realized that it was coming from the direction of the river. Amale quickly dressed and made her way to the water's edge, her footsteps silent on the earth. As she neared the river, she saw a figure standing by the water, bathed in the pale light of the moon. It was a woman, her long hair flowing like a dark river down her back, her face hidden in shadow. Amale approached cautiously, her instincts telling her that this was no ordinary visitor. The woman turned as she drew near, revealing a face both familiar and foreign, a visage that seemed to shift and change with the light. "You have heard the call," the woman said, her voice like the rustle of leaves in the wind. "You know what is required." Amale's heart sank as she recognized the figure before her, a spirit, an ancestor come to deliver the final message. "What must I do?" Amale asked, her voice trembling with fear and determination. The spirit stepped closer, her eyes reflecting the moonlight with an otherworldly glow. "The balance of the land demands a life," she said, her voice soft yet unwavering. "A life freely given, to restore what has been taken." Amale felt a wave of cold dread wash over her. She had known there would be a price, but to hear it spoken so plainly was almost more than she could bear. "Whose life?" she asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. The spirit reached out, gently touching Amale's cheek, her touch as cold as the winter wind. "The choice is yours," she said, "but know that the land does not forgive easily. The sacrifice must be made, or all that you have restored will be lost." Amale's mind raced as she tried to process the spirit's words. The weight of the decision before her was almost unbearable, but she knew that she could not turn away from it. The spirits had given her the power to save her people, but they had also demanded a price that only she could pay. The spirit stepped back, her form beginning to fade into the night. "The time is near," she said, her voice growing faint. "You must decide." And with that, she was gone, leaving Amale standing alone by the river, the sound of the water filling the silence that followed. Amale stood there for a long time, the enormity of the choice before her settling heavily on her shoulders. When she finally returned to the village, the first light of dawn was beginning to break over the horizon. She knew what she had to do, but the thought of it filled her with a sorrow so deep it threatened to overwhelm her. Jin-hyuk met her at the entrance to their home, his face filled with worry. "Amale, where have you been?" he asked, his voice gentle yet insistent. Amale looked into his eyes, seeing the love and trust that had brought them together, and she felt her heart break. She knew what she had to do, but the thought of losing him, of losing everything they had built together, was almost too much to bear. But she also knew that the land demanded a sacrifice, and that without it, all they had worked for would be lost. The choice was hers, and hers alone, and the time to make it was fast approaching. With a heavy heart, Amale took Jin-hyuk's hand and led him inside, knowing that whatever happened next, their lives would never be the same. The spirits had spoken, and the balance of the land would be restored, but at a cost that would change everything. The dawn of the final day arrived with a somber stillness that seemed to seep into the very bones of the village. The air was heavy, and even the birds seemed reluctant to sing, as though they too sensed the gravity of what was to come. Amal awoke with a clarity she had not felt in days, her heart resolved, even as it ached with the knowledge of what she must do. She spent the morning in quiet reflection, her mind turning over the events that had led her to this moment. The return of the waters, the warnings of the spirits, the love she had found in Jin-hyuk. All of it had been leading to this day. She knew that the decision she was about to make would not only shape her future, but the future of her people and the land itself. Amale stepped outside, the sun now fully risen, casting long shadows across the village. The villagers went about their tasks, unaware of the sacrifice that would be made to secure their future. She watched them, her heart swelling with love and sorrow, knowing that what she was about to do was for them, for the land, for everything she held dear. Jinyuk found her standing by the river, the place where so much had begun. He approached her quietly, his expression unreadable, but his eyes filled with concern. "Amale," he said softly, "you have been distant these past few days. I can see the weight you carry. Please, tell me what troubles you." Amale turned to face him, her eyes filled with tears that she fought to keep from spilling over. She reached out, taking his hand in hers, the warmth of his touch grounding her in the moment. "Jinyuk," she began, her voice trembling, "the spirits have spoken. They demand a sacrifice, a life freely given to restore the balance of the land." Jinyuk's eyes widened in shock, and he shook his head, refusing to believe what he was hearing. "No, Amal, there must be another way. We can find it together." Amale squeezed his hand, her grip firm, though her heart felt as though it might shatter. "There is no other way. The spirits were clear. The land requires a life, and it must be mine." Jinyuk recoiled as though struck, his face pale with horror. "No, Amale, I won't allow it. You can't do this. We need you. Our people need you." Amale felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she remained resolute. "I have been chosen, Jinyuk. This is my fate, and I cannot turn away from it. If I do not make this sacrifice, all that we have fought for will be lost. The waters will dry up, the land will wither, and our people will suffer." Jinyuk's breath came in ragged gasps, his eyes filling with tears. "But what about us? What about the life we were building together?" Amale placed a hand on his cheek, her touch gentle as she gazed into his eyes with all the love she felt for him. "We were brought together for a reason, Jinyuk. Our love has given me the strength to face this. It is because of you that I have the courage to do what must be done. You must live on, for both of us, and carry the memory of our love in your heart." Jinyuk's shoulders shook as he pulled her into a tight embrace, his tears soaking into her hair. "I can't lose you, Amale. I don't know how to go on without you." Amale held him close, her own tears falling freely now. "You will find the strength, Jinyuk. You have always been strong, and you will continue to be. Our people will need you, and you must guide them, just as you have guided me." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other as if the world around them had ceased to exist. But the weight of the decision pressed heavily on them, and they both knew that time was running out. Finally, Amal pulled back, her face set with quiet determination. "The time has come," she said softly. "I must go to the sacred grove, where the ancestors dwell. There I will offer my life to restore the balance." Jinhyuk nodded, though his face was pale and drawn, his eyes filled with anguish. "I will go with you," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. Amal shook her head gently. "This is something I must do alone. The spirits require it, and so do the ancestors. But know that you are with me in spirit, and that our love will give me the strength to face what lies ahead." Jinhyuk looked as though he might protest, but then he nodded, his expression one of resigned acceptance. "I will be here, waiting for you," he said quietly, "and I will carry your memory with me, always." Amale kissed him softly, a final gesture of love and farewell, before turning and making her way toward the sacred grove. The path was familiar to her now, each step bringing her closer to the place where the ancestors waited, where her fate would be sealed. The grove was silent as she entered, the trees standing tall and still, their branches heavy with the weight of centuries. Amale knelt at the center of the grove, the same spot where she had once sought the guidance of the ancestors, and now where she would offer her life in exchange for the life of the land. She closed her eyes, her heart filled with peace and acceptance. "Spirits of the land," she whispered, "I offer my life freely, in the hope that the balance will be restored and that my people will prosper." The air around her seemed to shimmer, the presence of the spirits gathering, their voices soft and resonant. "Amale, your sacrifice is accepted, the land will be restored, and your people will thrive once more." As the words faded into the air, Amale felt a deep sense of calm wash over her. The fear and uncertainty that had plagued her for so long melted away, replaced by a profound sense of purpose. She knew that she was fulfilling her destiny, that her life would serve a greater good. A soft light began to glow around her, growing brighter with each passing moment until it enveloped her completely. Amale felt herself being lifted, her spirit rising from the earth, her connection to the land deepening as she became one with it. And then, in a final burst of light, she was gone. The grove fell silent once more, the light fading, leaving only the trees and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. But the land around the grove felt different, renewed, as if infused with new life. The water in the rivers flowed stronger, the earth beneath it rich and fertile, and the air carried a sense of peace that had not been felt in years. Jinyuk waited by the river, his heart heavy with grief, but also filled with a deep respect for the woman he had loved. He knew that she was gone, that her sacrifice had restored the balance, and that her spirit would forever be part of the land she had loved so dearly. He knelt by the water's edge, his tears mingling with the river, a silent tribute to the life that had been given to save them all. And as the sun set on that final day, casting a warm glow over the village, Jinyuk vowed to honor Amale's memory, to carry on her legacy, and to ensure that the land and its people would continue to thrive. Amale's sacrifice would not be forgotten, and her spirit would live on in the land, in the water, and in the hearts of all who had known her. And though the village would mourn her loss, they would also celebrate the life she had given and the peace she had brought to their world.